After 2,000 years under multiple imperial dynasties and 37 years under the Kuomintang, or National Party, China is now controlled by the Communist Party, the People's Republic of China. Modern China lies as the world's second largest economy with the world's largest population and as the leader in global trade and manufacturing. China was able to rise into the role of world power because of the stance Deng Xiaoping took to rebuild and reform the Chinese economy. In 1949, the Nationals were overthrown by the current ruling party, the People's Republic of China. At the end of the Chinese Civil War, the Communist Party chose Mao Zedong as leader. With the help of the Soviet Union, the government of the People's Republic of China was established. But with ideological differences between Mao and the Soviets, a split became inevitable. Sino-Soviet relations continued to degrade until the Soviets pulled all technological and economical help, as well as destroying any projects being worked on within the country. After this, Mao realized how reliant China was on outside help. He decided that China had to industrialize on its own. The Chinese looked at the 1920 Soviets as a model of how to begin industrialization. Mao began confiscating and controlling food production in the country as well as taking land from peasants, then putting them within countrywide communes of thousands of people. The movement to industrialize was dubbed the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward was a 5-year plan to turn China into an advanced and industrialized communist nation. But after 3 years, the plan was called off. The combination of terrible policies, centralization of food and production, along with bad farming techniques, led to mass starvation and famine in China. By the time Mao died in 1976, anywhere between 20 and 42 million people had died. The economy was in ruins, and China was isolated from the rest of the world. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping became the paramount leader of China. Xiaoping was born in 1904 in Guang'an, Sichuan County. Xiaoping was a standout in school and always top of his class. Back in China, Deng Xiaoping became a powerful figure for the People's Republic. His work for the Communist Party throughout the early and mid-1900s, which included the Chinese Civil War and World War II, allowed him to rise and become one of the most powerful figures in the party. Xiaoping's time in Europe gave him the skill and leadership experience, along with the education necessary to make him a great leader. His time spent abroad also gave him a much more liberal and capitalistic view of politics and economics than previous leaders like Zhou Enlai or Mao Zedong. Deng's overly capitalistic views even led to him being banished from 1969 to 1973. 2 years after the death of Chairman Mao, Deng Xiaoping was made the paramount leader of China. Unlike other leaders and officials who frowned upon capitalism, Xiaoping believed that integrating some capitalistic ideals into the government was essential to the ability for the Chinese economy to expand. In the early years of the Deng era, parties made of government officials were sent on study tours to foreign countries. These parties traveled to over 50 countries in 1978 alone. They went to observe farms, factories, as well as science and technology units. The groups returned home with suggestions and ideas of what China could do to implement in their country. These trips continued in the following years to parts of Europe, Hong Kong, and other economic hotspots like Japan. With these visits, Chinese officials would be able to see how far back China was compared to the rest of the world. One of the most important visits was made from April to May of 1978. Officials from the State Planning Commission and Ministry of Foreign Trade traveled to Hong Kong to evaluate the potential for assisting China to host manufacturing, finance, and other industries. During this time, the province of Guangdong had the problem of people fleeing across the border to Hong Kong in search of work. During a visit to the province a year prior, in 1977, the issue was brought to Xiaoping's attention. His solution to the problem was not to tighten border security, but instead to improve the local economy so people would not have to flee to Hong Kong in search of work. China had been very isolated from non-communist countries for decades before 1978. They were even on bad terms with the Soviet Union. Deng saw this as a major roadblock for China if they were to improve their economy. With this in mind, Deng set out to open up China to the rest of the world. After returning from the Hong Kong visit, the idea of setting up an export and processing zone in Bao'an County, Sichuan Province was explored. Since this area was across the border from Hong Kong, it would be easy to trade goods and export manufactured products without tariffs. With this, the State Council formally approved the establishment of the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone. Also following the Hong Kong visit, Beijing formed the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office under the State Council. Once the relations between China and Hong Kong was normalized, the British colony would act as a conduit for capital and knowledge about global economic developments. Also in 1978, a party headed by the deputy head of the Shanghai Revolutionary Committee, Lin Huzhai, was sent to Japan. The party visited from March 28th to April 22nd. The group was consisted of members from the State Planning Commission, Ministry of Commerce, the Ministry of Foreign Trade, and the Bank of China. Japan was an especially important visit because it had faced many similar problems as China, but had successfully modernized. The Japanese government gave much more control to local economies when handling money, as well as having a much more dynamic civilian economy which was driven by consumer industries. Upon returning to China, Lin Huzhai reported that Japan had boldly introduced more foreign technologies, made use of foreign capital, and vigorously developed education and scientific research. Japan was also willing to provide economic aid and technology for China. With these political visits, China was able to get a grasp of what the best methods to industrializing and modernizing were. The visits would also open up China to the rest of the world by establishing foreign relations. As Deng was able to push China forward, he also had to rid the country of ghosts lingering from the past. This included pushing back political rivals and stabilizing his position. Deng himself also stated, "Our nation's system is basically taken from the Soviet Union. It is backwards, deals with issues superficially, duplicates structure, and advances bureaucratism." At this point, Deng was able to go and begin setting goals for the Chinese economy. He consulted economists from China and the World Bank and ended up with a prediction that from 1980 to 2000 that the yearly income from China would quadruple. The first major step to take was to build up China's infrastructure. The country had to create enough food for the population and also create enough electricity for the country. As China began hosting manufacturing and other businesses, their economy grew rapidly. From 1978 to 2000, their GPA grew an average of 10% each year. This booming economic growth brought on rapid urbanization and lifted more than 800 million people out of poverty, with the previously centralized economy shifting to a much more market-based economy. This rapid growth was not all positive. It created large amounts of inflation and drove up the wealth gap. Even given the things that did not go as planned, the positives of the economic reform greatly outweighed the negatives. With the stand Deng Xiaoping took, he was able to modernize China and reform the Chinese economy to become the second largest in the world. China is the leader in global trade, which includes manufacturing 70% of mobile phones, 60% of shoes, along with many other products. The South China Sea sees many important trade routes. These routes see annually around $5 trillion worth of goods pass through. China is also home to many important economic zones and cities. With the amount of goods that China manufactures, the world depends on the country. This, along with their large economy, cements China in its place as a world power and puts Deng Xiaoping in history as one of the most influential leaders ever.